Okay, so I'm going to talk about two projects that I did for our experience. So I'll talk about the first project, which I started in the spring of 2020. So we met in 2019 and did the workshop. And I was all excited about thinking about different projects that I could do. And then I found out that Hawkeye's chemistry, biology, health science area was going to have a significant remodel. So we were told our building was going to be remodeled, basically gutted from the inside out, but we didn't know when. So we didn't know when we were going to have to get out of our lab. And there wasn't going to be, a lot of investment in new things because of this big remodel. So I was kind of uncertain about what I should start and what I should get into. So for my first project, I decided to collaborate with the University of Northern Iowa. And I'll talk about that. And then due to COVID, I did a second project. So the first one was adding research to my existing class, General Chemistry 1, and I teach that once a year. So I teach that every spring. So in the fall, I developed it, and then the pilot started in January of 2020. And that was a collaboration with Kurt Hansen in the chemistry department at UNI. So the background was to look at a distillation column and find the best design of a distillation column. So that's what they were working on at UNI. So my students were going to be using GC, so gas chromatography, to analyze fractions of mixtures of methanol and ethanol. So typically, I start kind of the usual general chemistry labs, and a lot of them involve separation. And then they also involve looking at water. So how, differences in solubilities, differences in polarities, differences in intermolecular forces between materials. So this was going to fit right in. So we were going to start with our general chemistry labs, teaching the students some of the basics, and then we would move into this project and analyze some different fractions that were pulled off the distillation column, and then report back. So here is the timeline and outline for the project. So the first few weeks had the students come in and talk about the project, what we were going to do, and then we did our kind of usual general chemistry labs and really focused on separation techniques. So, starting with your basic, you'd separate your salt and sand, how would you do it? And then looking at some gravimetric analysis, some titration, and learning about chromatography. We do not have a high school chemistry prerequisite for General Chemistry 1. So sometimes I'll have a student who's never been in a lab before, ever, and I need to make sure that, we have our basic measurement and techniques down. And we also went to the library and did some literature work and had instruction from our reference librarian, worked on the project background, UNI field trip, meet with people at UNI, learn about the project, and then collect our data. And then the plan was to return to UNI in April of 2020, and the Hawkeye students would present and the UNI students would ask questions. And we were gonna have sort of a oral presentation, poster session, kind of mini conference kind of thing together. So that was the original plan. And we got as far as our field trip to UNI. So at the end of February, on a snowy day, we all made it up to UNI, and we had a great field trip. So Kurt gave all the students a tour of the chemistry department. So looking at several different labs, several different professors' work, talking about his work, talking about what my students were going to do. We gave them some training on the GCs, and it was a really great day. And then we went back to the lab the next week, and the students started using the instruments, and we started working for 1 week in the lab. And then on March 13th, we all went home because of COVID. So that ended that project. And at the end of the semester, I did ask the students about different components of the class just to get some feedback on how everything went. And they did mention the field trip and how much they liked it and how it just got them excited about science. And that's really important to me because that's one of my goals. So one of the things that's really important to me is that my students feel like when they transfer, they are prepared and that they can participate. Because in my years of experience, like, and you all probably hear it too, sometimes students will feel, well, I come from a community college and these students have been here, and they have maybe a little less confidence when they make that transfer. And so I really want them to be confident and be unafraid to just talk to professors and get involved. So I think they really enjoyed that experience. And so I was, even though we didn't get to do the project full on, I was glad we got to go on the field trip, and I think the students really enjoyed it. So then with the COVID restrictions and the potential remodel of our laboratory, which is beginning now in May of 2021, I'm teaching this again in the spring of 2021, and I had to shift a little bit. So because my students couldn't work in groups and we had all the restrictions, I couldn't do a data collection. So I decided to have a research seminar to go along with the goals of just getting the students excited and learning what was out there for them when they transfer and hearing some stories about research. Okay, so that was my goal. So I was teaching the class in a hybrid format. So Canvas is our LMS, and they had content online, videos by me and other things like that. And then we met once a week. And so I had a 75-minute lecture period and a 2-hour lab for this hybrid. So when we met on that once a week, we met on Thursdays, we would do kind of the usual things, problem solving, kind of traditional lecture, and then we would have our laboratory. And so I incorporated the research seminar into that time on Thursdays. And sometimes the presenter was in person, sometimes they were on Zoom, sometimes the students were in person, sometimes the students were on Zoom, or a combination of both. So we used the technology for that. So what I did was I gave them a questionnaire with questions I had gotten from our workshop in 2019. We had talked about some, pre-research questions, and so I used that as my guide. And then we also participated and we went virtually to Hawkeye's liberal arts mini conference that we have. And we talked about how scientists need to disseminate their findings. And Hawkeye's been having a liberal arts conference to just showcase some work of alumni and faculty and students. So we participated in that. And they also worked with the research librarian and had library instruction on how to find peer-reviewed articles and use the databases. And then she also worked with them on source credibility. So looking at fake news versus credible information. And then she walked them through the different parts of a scientific article and had some activities they did so they were better equipped to find their peer-reviewed articles, discern whether they were credible, and then evaluate the different components. And then for the seminar speaker part, each week the students had a review sheet that they had to answer those questions there. So they each had to write that out and then take a screenshot or photo of it and submit it to Canvas. And then they earned points for that towards their grade. So it was pretty low stress for them, but they had to provide their feedback. And then we would have some discussion about it as a class. And then they had a post-seminar or questionnaire. So the same questions at the beginning with a little more for feedback. So here's the questions that I gave them. And like I said, I got these from our initial workshop that we did in 2019. Had they done a research project before? What was their knowledge? Could they talk with peers? Could they use the library? And then just find out what they were interested in. And so here's some, I'm just going to go through each component of what we did. And then I have some student quotes there for you to take a look at. So the conference, we went to the keynote. So we did a virtual conference and we talked about how people prepare for conferences and how information is disseminated. And they heard from an alum who just talked about her experience at the community college and how she transferred to the four-year university. And it was very motivating and uplifting for the students. And so she gave a really good presentation. And then at the library, like I said, it was a workshop on fake news versus real news, how to fact check, source credibility, and then looking at the components of a scientific article so that the students could gain knowledge there about what they needed to when they were evaluating their own articles. And then I gave them an assignment to go along with it. I asked them to go to the university where they wanted to transfer and the department that they were interested in working in, and research some of the faculty members' work in that department. Then they had to find one article by one faculty member. So if the student was going to UNI, Iowa State, I had some at all three regents, find an article by a faculty member in their department, and then they used what the librarian taught them to analyze that article. So that was our instruction assignment. And then we had 5 different presentations from some of my colleagues. Okay, so started with Kurt Hansen at UNI, who I had collaborated with on Project 1. And he talked a little bit about, what research is and some of the projects that he's done over his career. So he kicked it off. And then we also heard from my colleague at Hawkeye, Irene Metz. She teaches chemistry with me, and she's also a PhD candidate at Iowa in computational chemistry. And she's finishing up her work right now. And so her work is, she's incorporating her computational along with teaching. So she's looking at new ways to teach quantum mechanics. So it went right in with what the students were learning and what we talked about with quantum mechanics in class, the quantum numbers. And so they heard from her. And then my colleague in biology, Cassie Einfeld, who is a Hawkeye graduate. I wanted them to hear from a community college graduate and how research had, affected her and her teaching and how she brought that forward. And then I talked a little bit about my story. And I particularly focused on when I was an undergrad and I worked at a national laboratory, just to talk about, opportunities outside of the state or some other opportunities there and some people I had met. And then we wrapped it up with Josh Seabury at UNI. He is doing some research at Wind Cave National Park, and he's doing field work exploring parts of the cave where few people have ever been. And so he was talking about the field work and then also the lab work that they've done in the cave. And they were getting ready to take another group of students to the cave. They just returned from the 2021 field work. And the students were unable to attend via Zoom, but he did have a video that the students made sharing their different experiences. And my students really enjoyed that. And Josh talked a lot about not just the chemistry, but everything else that was involved, like the psychology of squeezing down into this tiny little space. And they had this training box that they had to squeeze through. And, I have some students that are interested in health and exercise science, and they had to do physical fitness training to be able to go in the cave. So it was a really good example of like the integration that we need in science and how you need a team. And so that was a nice way to end that set of presentations. And then afterwards, I gave them the questionnaire again after the seminar was over. And then I just asked them for some feedback as well. And so, results wise, and this was all self-reported, but the students felt like they had learned and they were more comfortable understanding about research and being able to talk with people about it using the library. And I got really positive comments just being able to do something outside of kind of the typical, lecture and lab, and to interact with people. And that was important to me because I really want my students to, like I told you, have some confidence, when they leave Hawkeye, when they leave the community college, to just get right involved at their next institution. And I felt like the students were excited about that kind of thing. And I kind of love the suggestions, I would suggest a field trip because I can't wait until we can do field trips again. So I'm really looking forward to getting back to that kind of interaction. And so from now to beyond, for the next 2 years, my lab, our chemistry lab and our biology labs are in a temporary location. So I won't be adding on a lot of research or new laboratory activities in the next 2 years because we're having a huge remodel and we're in a temporary location. But I'm looking forward to continuing the seminar. I felt like the response to that was good, and I have some potential to expand. I want to expand my speakers, like the diversity of speakers, the different backgrounds, the different areas of science. I think there's a lot of potential there, especially now because we're used to using Zoom, right? So I don't need somebody to come in physically. We're all used to using this technology that we're using right now. So I'm excited about that. And I'm excited in the next 2 years for developing some things. And then when we get in our new facility 2 years from now, then we'll be able to do some new activities. And that includes collaborations with you and I and other colleges, and also my colleagues in the health sciences, because we'll have this new collaborative building where our science faculty and health science faculty, we're going to be all together. And so we have a lot of potential for what we can do in the future, and I'm excited about that. So thank you all very much, and let me know if you have any questions.